Okay, we're back on the subject of dehydrating potatoes. The last one I did, I cut thicker. This one I'm going to cut thinner and see what happens. I haven't done that much in the way of potatoes before. You know, I normally do like apples, I do carrots, and a few other things, okay? But essentially, potatoes, they're a slightly different kettle of fish. They require different techniques. When I do carrots, if I do them ultra thin, it only takes about 3 hours to dry out a whole bunch of carrots, okay? And like proper thin. So this is a mandolin slicer. I've got a dial on the side there and adjust the, you probably can't see it moving up and down, I don't know, but there you go. The thing goes up and down, so we can choose a nice thin slice and see whether we can get this totally thin and see basically what, whether that will do. So this is a raw potato, ultra fine sliced on a mandolin to see whether we can dehydrate it. Here we go. Okay, so we've already got them. These are the slices of potato, much thinner already. They're not the minuscule thinness I used to be able to do with carrots, because I think that potatoes have a different texture and they're more likely to break open. They're wetter for a start off. The carrots are nowhere near as wet as these things are. If you look at the way the mandolins come out, plenty of juice is just poured out of the potatoes. Okay, potatoes are quite juicy things. You don't think about them when you're boiling them, but they are covered or filled with juice. And that juice contains all the starch and all kinds of other funny things, so it's different to potatoes and apples. So that's just my point there. My concern will of course be rehydrating them, okay, because this is starting off raw, and how we're gonna go through the process of rehydrating them and using them afterwards, that's a different kettle of fish. If you've got partially cooked potatoes, then that's something else. So just try and get these pieces into the dehydrator trays. Starting with the outsides and then basically working in, trying to keep them one layer on each tray. I may only be able to get one potato in. Obviously the thinner you slice it, the more trays you need for the quantity of potato you've got, and that can be a bastard. Forgive the language, but you get the drift there. So quite a few slices, not much damage done. So this is the second tray. Remember that my attitude towards this is just like having a savings account. At least I've got carbohydrate and foods of a source of type stocked up for when I've got the flu and I can't get out to the shops, okay? That's why I've got a couple of kilograms of beans of different types. The winter is coming, the flu season, it's all out there. And if I've got some stocks, if I get ill, being self-employed, okay, I got to rely 100% on myself, right? Sometimes if you work for a company, you can take a day off, and that day off is paid for by the company, so you don't have to worry too much about your bills. I'm self-employed, okay? I've got to make sure I've got stock to look after, so I can look after myself. Still the same quantity of potato, 2 potatoes just like last time, thinner slices. It's taken up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trays, not the 3 that we had before. And I've even put a couple of pieces in the bottom of the dehydrator. So if you slice thinly, remember it's going to take up more room in a dehydrator. Let's try and see if I can get this aligned. Difficult to do with one hand, so just bear with me a second. There we go. That's in place. And just like before, we're just going to shove the lid on. Right, now this is quite interesting. The slices of ultra thin sliced pieces of potato have actually blackened a little. Now you got these white chunks, I don't know whether you can see that there. There's a white little raised bits on there. It looks a bit like a bacterial bloom. I'm pretty convinced that isn't. I think that's much more like the starch which has been coming out of the potato. But the black is probably a bit of tarnish, caused by either a bit too much heat, because this layer which is currently at the top of the dehydrator was previously at the bottom where the most of the heat goes to. So maybe it had a bit too much heat. Maybe that's not terribly good. But it's quite interesting that these are uncooked and sliced. Okay, whereas these ones, which are just like regular pieces of potato basically, were blanched and they were thick sliced. Whereas these ones were thin sliced and they weren't blanched. Maybe what I should have done with the thin ones is to soak them in, or give them a little brush over with lemon juice prior to dehydrating them to stop any tarnishing. Okay, maybe that's what's really required there. I think that would make a lot of sense. But on the other hand, who the hell wants potatoes that taste of lemon juice? I'd probably rather have them slightly manky, the proper dried and preserved, than anything else. This one is already proper dried, preserved piece of potato. Okay, so just carry on dehydrating and hope for the best. Further on down the stack, but the rest of the heat doesn't come through. Still wet and still large. Further on down, barely touched. So I think that's more or less evidence that the darkness, the tarnishing we saw in the other pieces of potato, could have been due to too much heat. Remember, I've turned the whole old trays round, so essentially these ones down the bottom are the ones which were getting less heat earlier on. Okay, so maybe the blackness is not bacteria, okay, but it's just a question of too much heat and not good for thin pieces of potato. It's difficult to say, but the bottom line is I'm still going to eat the friendly things anyway. And when you're running out of food and all you got is dry goods in stock, you have your dry goods. It's just the way it is. But you can see the contrast in appearance of the potato pieces by comparison with the thicker sliced blanched ones. Okay, big difference in appearance. Okay, just to make things seem even more complex, if we go right to the bottom, I put these pieces of potato right on the bottom of the dehydrator. The hot air comes straight down from the fan and hits the bottom first. Now these pieces have got very little discoloration on them. That one's more or less perfect and normal, and even looks very slightly cooked actually. So essentially, if you got enough heat to more or less cook your potato, you're not going to get any discoloration at all. So potatoes are very different to carrots and very different to apples when you're dehydrating. That's like the message of today. And I would recommend either blanching or giving them a layer of lemon juice either side before you do dehydrate them, or possibly both.